Okay, so let's start. So what we're going to learn today is the first parak of the Shemona Perakim. That's the sugya, Yanu Diyema. But before we start the first parak, I just want to comment something that struck me about the Hakdama. We were talking about in the Hakdama, we focused mainly on how the Rambam says that Avis is about making Tanoim bets and making someone who's Kamat Navi, and the Rambam says the whole function of one of the main functions of Masechtas Avis is to tell us about the Messiah. So Avis is about creating authorities, you could say, or developing someone as an authority, as a Torah authority, as even a divine authority, as we've been discussing in the past year. So it's something ironic here, which is that in the Hakdama to Shemona Perakim, Rambam tells us also an anti-authority statement, which is the other thing we discussed. Da'ainu kabel ha'emes mishamrei. Kabel ha'emes mishamrei means we don't care about the authority, care merely about the content. So there seems to be like two contradictory things. There's some irony going on over here. On the one hand, obviously is about who are these people? Why do we care about what these people say? Teretz says these people were chashuva people, they had the good character and so on and so forth. And then the Rambam saying, I'm going to teach you what you need to know about Pekei Avos, but don't worry about who says it. Right? So it's a weird thing. But the pshat is like this. The pshat is really not a contradiction, because if you want to know the truth, if you want to become a chacham, so the eitzah is Kabbalah Emes Mishamrei. The eitzah is to look for the truth. And then if you are Makabel Emes Mishamrei, and now you become a great man, so now you become an authority. So in other words, what we have to know about a person in order to establish him as an authority is that he was anti-authority in a certain sense. He's not just copying everyone else. He was looking for the emes. So the two teachings actually go together, because the teaching, if you want to be a Navi, if you want to be a Hatana, so you want to know the Chochmas HaTorah, so you could be Mamshech, the Messiah, and so on and so forth, as we discussed, then you have to Mekabel Avos Yisham. You have to look for the truth. And then you'll become a person who's an authority, and you're a Gavra. So it's just interesting that there's these two poles in the Hakdama, but it's not really it's not a contradiction, obviously. Okay, fine. So here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to assume that the Olam has some familiarity with first parak. So I won't. Let's just briefly summarize at least the parts of the first parak that I want to focus on. First parak of the Shemona Perakim is the most extremely important parak in the Rambam's writings, because if there's any place that where the Rambam tells us Maze Adam, what is a human being? It's right here. And the Rambam says like this. The Rambam starts off by asserting that a person has one nefesh, not various nefeshes. That one nefesh does many things. Unlike some of the doctors say that actually a man has three different nefeshes. I'm just going to summarize the parak, and then we'll address the points that we want to address. And then he says, listen, if you want to make a person into fix his character, what you're doing is essentially ripoy hanefesh. So then you have to know what the nefesh is. You have to know what the nefesh's parts. So he goes through the parts of the nefesh, which he explained earlier. It's not really different parts. It's really different actions that the nefesh does. Because really the nefesh is one thing. We'll soon talk about what is that thing. What is the nefesh? And the Rambam just starts talking about whether man has one nefesh or many nefeshes, but he seems to be assuming that we know what the word nefesh means, I guess. And he says the nefesh does many things, but then he reminds us that we're talking about the human nefesh, not the animal nefesh. The animal nefesh is fundamentally different than the human nefesh, And he asserts this very strange thing, which is that the sense of, let's say, touch. When we say a human being has a sense of touch, and we say an animal has a sense of touch, that's really using the same word in two different meanings. Shituf Hashem, bilvad. Shituf Hashem means we're using the same word in two different ways. Classic Shituf Hashem, the Rambam says in the Milas HaHigoyin, the classic example of a Shituf Hashem is the word ayin, which means an eye, and it means a spring. No shaykhis. One word that has two completely different meanings. Similarly, hargosha, the Rambam says, has two different meanings. Okay, we'll get to that soon. And then he goes through the Chalkei HaNefesh, 5 Chalkei HaNefesh, and that I will not spend any time on today. Perhaps we'll get to that another time. 5 Chalkei HaNefesh, Zon, Margish, Medame, Misayr, and Sechli. And then he says, that this one nefesh is like chomer, and the seichel is its tzura. And if it doesn't have this tzura, which is the seichel, then its potential to receive that tzura is for nothing. And that's how he reads the pasuk, Gam b'loy das nefesh loy toiv. A nefesh that doesn't achieve das is loy toiv. But then he tells us that if you really want to understand tzura and chomer and seichel, it's a very deep stuff, and he sort of walks it back. Okay, so that's the summary of the parak, Linyanenu, because I skipped the whole middle part about all those details, which I don't want to go into. Okay, so let's start with the first question. So the Rambam is going to teach us something about the nefesh. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, well, what is a nefesh? Right? Maskim, that's the first question. So thankfully, the Rambam himself told us what it is in Yesodei HaTorah. Okay, everyone could see the Yesodei HaTorah on the screen? Yeah? How about a nod or a shake your head so I'll know? Yeah, you can see it? Okay. Perek Dalet Halacha Ches in Yesodei HaTorah. Nefesh kol basar hi. Oops. Pull that up again. Here we go. Nefesh kol basar hi tzurasai shenasan loy hakel. So don't read on here because it gets very confusing very fast. The first line the Rambam says is that the nefesh of all basar, and this includes humans, is its tzura. It's God-given tzura. Okay, so what's a tzura? So now that we know a nefesh, the nefesh of every basar is its tzura, which we could translate into English as form. But what's a tzura? So if you go back to Halacha Vav, the Rambam says that the motions of the Galgal cause the various elements to be mixed together. If there's any points over here that require more hesber, please stop me. But the elements shouldn't concern us. Basically, there's material, like we have the table of elements. So the Rambam has four elements, fire, air, earth, and water. And I got the order wrong there. But those are the four elements, and they mix together through the motions of the spheres. I'm just giving us a basically the whole theory of nature, science. Okay, so I'm in Halacha Vav there. The Galgal moves, and therefore the elements mix together, and you have all sorts of golems. And each golem, again, we bring in Kale, nois and the golem tzura ru'yalai. Each golem, so golem means matter, formless matter. Formless matter then receives the form that is appropriate for it. Ishim, the 10th level of Malachim, is a form, itself is a form, which is called Ishim. Okay, so everything receives a form. Everything that exists it has a form, and the Rambam says explicitly in Al-Chazayin, la'olam einat haroya goylem b'loi tzura or tzura b'loi goylem. There is no, you'll never find something that doesn't have a form, and you'll never find a form that doesn't have some matter that is informed. You in your mind can divide everything that exists. In your mind, you can look at something and say, wait a second. Let's say a table, right? So you look at a table, you say, what is the table? Well, there's the material of which the table is made, but the table is not merely the material, because the table is a table. It's not something else. But there's some underlying matter that comprises the table. And the proof of that is you can turn a table into something else. So in your mind, then you can understand that a table and every single thing is its underlying material and whatever that thing is. And even you have to understand, even the most basic thing, even a piece of sand or a piece of dirt, there's a material that becomes a piece of dirt. Material becomes a piece of sand. So everything that the Rambam has chomer and tzura, has a form, and remember from Allah Havav, the form comes from a malach. Okay?
Is that referring to a physical form? Meaning the matter is being filled into a form. Is that a physical form, even though it's coming from the malach?
It does not mean shape, if that's your question.
So it's some sort of spiritual form?
Yes. Form means that which makes it what it is. It's whatness. It's mahus. And that's what mahus means, whatness. And what that means is that there is no thing that exists that we know of that isn't something. Right? Everything is something. That thingness, that identity is real, according to the Rambam. And it comes from somewhere. In other words, there are X number of identities that things could have. You could be a table, you could be a this, you could be a that, you could be a that, and there's like a library of forms in this malach, in this 10th level of malach. He's a repository of all these ideas, all these concepts that golems, which means matter that's formless. Remember, there's no such thing, but in your mind, we recognize that everything is made up of two aspects. There's a material that is something. Does that make sense? I'm not doing the best job of explaining this.
Is this what the Ramban refers to as Hiyuli?
Yeah, so Hiyuli is the Goylem B'loi Tzura, which only exists in theory.
Right.
Yeah, so it's important that it exists in theory because it's if you want to talk about Ma'aseh Bereshis, you say, well, Hiyuli is real in terms of the theory, in terms of the makeup of everything. We understand that there's Hiyuli, and then there's the whatness that's given to the Hiyuli, the form that's given to it. It's made into something.
Right. So what Lamaisa is a nefesh, it's the tzura of what?
Okay, so now let's go to halacha ches. Let's just finish. You see in halacha zayin, he says the tzuras without a goylem can't be seen by the eye. They can only be seen by the eye of the mind. And the tzuras that don't have a goylem, what are those? Those are malachim. Rambam says in the Meira. So in other words, the fact that there's something a tzura that's not informing anything, that we can infer the existence of that. We can infer the existence of a tzura b'lei goylem, but we can't see it. Now, going back to, so what's a nefesh? So nefesh kobas. Yeah.
The last thing. A malach is what? Is a tzura, but without a goylem? It didn't come from it. What does that mean? It didn't come from it. It's not any matter.
Right.
Even like, because matter means in this world.
So we have to figure out a definition of matter. I don't remember the Rambam's definition of matter, but malachim are immaterial. Whatever the definition of matter is, probably something that has dimensions and something that's divisible. Malachim are immaterial.
So chaymer really only exists here.
Yes.
There's no chaymer in Shemayim, Kila.
No. Not
Okay.
Shemayim as in whatever, right?
As in Shemayim.
Yeah, whatever. It's complicated actually, but yeah, we could say that. Yes, absolutely. That's a big machlekes, because that's why the Rambam says you cannot see a malach. It's impossible to see a malach because there's nothing to see, and therefore, when it says anytime you see a malach in Tanakh, it has to have happened b'mar nevuah, which the Ramban in Vayera says Dvar melu asur l'shomam kol sheken lahamim behem, and Ramak says that malachim are gashmi, but a gashmi dak, some sort of subtle matter.
The regular tsura could be seen.
Sublime. What?
But a regular tsura that has the golem, that's something which could be seen by a human.
So when we
Even
see a
though it's not a
table,
physical-
we're seeing. I don't know. Are we seeing the tableness? I don't know. I mean, we're seeing something, a table, and a table has chaymer and tsura. We don't. The fact that there is chaymer and tsura separately, that's what something we divide in our minds. But we're seeing the thing that has a form.
Even though it's a spiritual form.
It's an idea. It's more like of an idea. In other words, if you want to know, like you have a table, so at what point, let's see, like Masechtas Kalim, right? So we always have to figure out at what point is it no longer a table. That what we're trying to capture, tableness, that's its form. And remember, but everything has that. Again, so don't think just the table. Everything has that because everything is something. What does it mean? Everything is something. It means everything is such that at a certain point, it's not that anymore, right? Sand is sand. What if you take sand and you make it into glass? So at a certain point in the transformation, it's no longer sand. So that mahus, that identity of being sand, that's called a tsura. And the world is so constituted that everything is something. And that thingness is spiritual, is an interesting word to use, but yeah, it comes from malachim. We have to figure out what malachim are, but that's sort of begging the question here. But okay, I think this is sufficient for now. We'll get clearer when we learn about the nefesh, and I think it will become a lot clearer. So if it doesn't, you tell me then. Let's leave this for now. Halacha ches says nefesh kabasa hi tzuras shenas le'akel, which means that a nefesh is merely the tsura of a living thing, right? The tsura of a living thing has a special word. The tsura of inanimate things does not have a special word. The tsura of a table, the tsura of a table, the tsura of a chair, tsura of a piece of dirt, tsura of a house. Those are all called tsuras. The tsura of living things has this new term called a nefesh, but all it is the tsura of any living thing. Okay, so the same way a table is a table by virtue of being a table and having the identity of tableness. So a horse is a horse because it has this identity of horseness. And a human is a human because it has an identity of humanness. And again, just because we can't touch, that's Rambam's point he said earlier, we can't touch that identity separate from any body, but we can understand that, yeah, you're not only your matter, you're not only the parts that we can touch, you're an idea. So you're a combination of matter that participates in some larger idea. And that larger idea comes from, what the Rambam says, the malach, that himself is an idea, himself is a tsura. Remember, he says in Allah Havav, Hamalach ha'asiri shehi hatsura hanikris ishim. Okay? So now, when we talk about it as a human nefesh one, you notice in Allah Ches, the Rambam continues and starts talking about when a person attains seichel, then he has a different tsura. That's what we'll get to that soon. I want you to just try to hold off on that in a minute. Let's talk about the first half over here, because the Rambam says two different things, and human being is quite complicated for this reason, because there are two things to say about a human. You see, in our Perakim Shemona Perakim, the Rambam says two things. He starts off discussing whether a man has one nefesh or three, and he says it's only one. And then in the end of the parak, he talks about the seichel is this nefesh is like chomer, and the seichel is a tzura. So that's a second step. We're now in the first step of the Rambam. The first step of the Rambam is we're talking about the human nefesh. And the human nefesh, as we see from Halacha Ches, is the human form, again, which means what makes a human. And the word nefesh is shared with with all living things. The word nefesh is shared with all living things because a horse has something that makes it a horse, and the human being is something that makes it a human being. Okay, so now going back to our parak over here, when the Rambam wants to know, does a man have one nefesh or three? You see what the question is like this. The question is, does a human have one identity, one whatness? We'll use the word mahus from now on. Does a human being have one mahus? The reason why I'm saying whatness and not mahus is because mahus, people use it in a lumdish way and they don't realize it just literally means whatness. But so I want you to think about whatness, meaning the concept that there's an identity of something is what it is. People use mahus as in like some sort of inspirational way. I don't know. Mahus of a mensch. Rambam's going to tell us about the mahus of a mensch, but you see in the Rambam, he's trying to make us think. He's not trying to just get us worked up. So in order to think, I'm using the word whatness, and now I'm going to switch back to mahus, okay? So nefesh adam, nefesh achas means like this. If you want to know what's the mahus of a human being, is a human being one thing or is a human being three things? So first, let's talk about the other side, the people that think that that the person has three nefashis, and these are great people that said that, and maybe the Mukubalim, some taka hold like that, whatever. It's a big machlekes. They say a human being is three things. He's a vegetable. On top of that, he's an animal. And on top of that, he's a human. Because we notice this interesting thing, that we share things with animals, and animals in turn share things with plants. So we have a very fundamental shaila. We have a very fundamental shaila. Are we three layers? Or are we one thing? Yeah, it's a very fair shaila. It's a very fair shaila. Now, I'm not sure what how we're supposed to answer this question. Has Ram know the answer is one or the other? What determines this? But I want to give you like a mushal. Let's say you, a human being, right, would somehow, let's say, sci-fi and who knows what kind of stuff, we can start communicating with animals and blend ourselves with animals somehow, right? Through brainwaves. I don't know. So then what would you be? You'd be, two things. I'm a person and an animal, and I'm doing both of them. I'm doing two things. So that's the concept over here. You could create one entity that really is two entities in this true sense. So the Raifim that the Rambam quotes believe that the human being is actually really three entities: a lower level entity, which is a vegetable, a plant, a higher level entity, which is an animal, and a higher than that, which is the human being. But the Rambam insists that no, man is only one thing. So when the Rambam says nefesh adam, nefesh achas, what that means is that man is only one thing. You don't have to think about souls. Does man have one soul? Does man have three souls? It's not an interesting word, soul. What's interesting, and by the way, to be very clear, we're going down the Rambam. The Rambam says that nefesh means a tzura. There are the people who Sag talks about it, the Ibn Daud, the Munarama. Maybe what is the nefesh? Is the nefesh something that exists prior to the person? And then we have this concept of Gilgul. Maybe it could come back. The way the Rambam defines the nefesh, at least at this point, it's the tzura of the living thing. It doesn't exist. It's not something else that exists and is, combined with the living thing. In theory, it could exist separate, maybe. In theory, as Rambam says, but actually, all it is the tzura of a specific living thing.
How would it be able to exist separately?
Well, because it comes from that malach. So, right, remember? So,
yeah, but a table can't exist chutz from the table.
Okay, but here's the thing: the table-ness, it's not so pashut because the table-ness comes from a malach, right? So before I made the table, was there a table-ness? If there be no tables, let's say I eradicate all tables from the world, is there still table-ness in existence in that 10th level malach called Ishim, who within himself contains the concept of a table?
Even if yes, but just as an idea, not ba'atzim.
Okay, but ideas are very important. Ideas are real. Okay, this is a big machlokes, Plato and Aristotle. This is Plato's doctrine of forms is that everything that forms exist prior to the things that participate in them, and then everything takes a share or shares in those forms. And Aristotle says no, the whole form is only Nachdem that you have a thing, you could talk about the form. This is a big shaila. The Rambam, I'm not sure what he says about it. It's not clear. He quotes Plato about this in a different context. What does Rambam hold about this? Not clear to me. Okay, we don't have to worry about that now. The point is like this. The point is, we don't have to worry about that. The point, Linyanenu, is the Rambam is telling us like this. Very important to know what a human being is. And soon we'll talk about why it's so important. But before we approach what is a human being, we want to know, well, is a human being one thing? Is a human being many things? And Rambam's first decide is that human being is one thing. Now, why is it important? Why is it important that human being is one thing? Why is that interesting? Because, very simple reason, because everything is supposed to be, I think we discussed this, the basis of morality or of ethics, meaning to say the basis of what should a person do, or what should anything do, is, according to the Rambam, what it is. So a lion, let's say, should be a lion. A horse should be a horse. And you might be realizing that when a horse is a horse, when he horses around, he's bad actualizing his horseness, his tzura of horseness. So he's living up to his tzura, right? So if we want to know what a human being should do with his life, well, we have to say, well, first question is, well, what is a human being? Okay. Now, the Rambam insists in Perakim, I'm jumping ahead over here, in Perakim, Royal Adam Lahavid Koiches Nafshe Kulam Fiadas. We spoke about this in the previous shurim. Everything a person does is supposed to be for one end, which is for das. Now, the reason why this is true in the Rambam is because a human being is one thing. Because if a human being would be a plant, and on top of that, an animal, and on top of that, a human being, then it wouldn't be correct to say that there's no purpose in human life except for das. It would be correct to say that the higher level, mahus, of the person, which is humanness, that higher level is for das. But the lower levels, is plantness and is animalness, if they have an identity of their own, a mahus of their own, then even if a person doesn't perfect his higher level, a humanness, you can't say that he's purposeless. Remember, the Rambam says in the end of Perak Aleph, going back to the end of Perak Aleph, he says if a person doesn't achieve seichel, his nefesh is for nothing. It's like his whole existence is for nothing. That's only true because the human being is one nefesh. If a human being would be three things, then you wouldn't be able to be so sharp and say everything has to be dedicated for one purpose. And if a person doesn't dedicate himself to that purpose, then he's lashav. All right, I'll take a little break if anyone has questions.
So l'may nafkamina if it's one or three.
Nafkamina is whether we could tell a person that if you're Isaac and you're fixing your plant self or your animal self, are you wasting your life away?
So practically, what does it mean to be Isaac in your goofs in your behemoth self?
Oh, it would mean to let's say with the plant self. Let's talk about that. So Isaac in the plant self would mean all I want to do is keep my body healthy. Let's say a person spends his life keeping his body healthy.
So according to the Rambam, there's no intrinsic value unless it brings you to das.
Correct. And that's because you are nothing but a das machine. And everything else follows from that.
Everything else is just a hechatimtza to get to that.
Correct.
And what's the behemoth self?
Is a hechatimtza. And it's a hechatimtza. Now, exactly like you said, it's a hechatimtza. So it's very musari, but the difference is that the Rambam believes this because he understands that he figured out what a human being is. We'll talk about that soon. Exactly. So far we said he's one thing. We didn't really talk about what that one thing is. But if we could figure out what that human being is one thing, and we can figure out what that one thing is, then we can know for certain that everything else is a chetimtza.
Okay, and the Rambam was right. If it would be three different nefashos in a person, so then why would how could they affect each other? We know that they do affect each other. If someone's hungry, it's harder for him to learn. It's harder for him to think. So if that's two different nefashos, why is one working to affecting another one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the theory of the three nefashos. I don't know how it explains that. In other words, what is it really three different entities that somehow combined? I don't know how. Right. Somehow they're combined. I don't know how. I mean, I was giving you my mashal before. Let's say we would figure out a way to combine a human with a real animal, and somehow they could work together, affect each other.
But then lemaisa, so then you're not really being chaylik. Meaning, at some point, once they affect each other, then you're gonna have to give a new tzura to that combination, because it is something new. So then go with the Rambam and just say that in Echnami it's all coming from one nefesh, and that's the tzura of a person.
So that's the thing. That's why I said before, I'm not sure what's machriya the shaila. What I meant to say was like this. You just said, if we combine it, now we have to give it a new tzura, right? I mean, yes and no, because if there's these pre-existing tzuras in nature that then combine to create a third tzura, which is a combination of the previous two, I'm not so sure it's right to call that a new tzura.
Well, it is, meaning I could hear that it coexisting with that is the fact that there's two different surahs. I hear a lumdus like that, but lamaisa, there is something new, meaning there's something new also. There's a chiddush.
Right, but if the chiddush is only that the tzuras can interact and not create, okay. I'm out of my depth here, so I'm going to keep quiet. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, go ahead, Moshe.
I just asked quickly something else.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that what these from wherever these are. By the way, who are they? The doctors of his time?
No, probably Greek. What's his name? Galen,
the philosophers.
I got the other guy's name. What?
So from that, I just wanted to know is that he seems to be assuming that they each have their own tzura. That means he has three different identities going on at once. Why can't it just be that these are the building blocks to get to? It says Mahus is only Badas, or whatever it's going to be, and everything until then is just a necessary evil, so to speak, just to get him there. Why does it have to be that each one has own Metzias, and therefore they share each other?
Right. No, the way you described it is the way the Rambam understands it, that those are all building blocks for one entity, which is the human.
No, right, but I'm saying, but the Reifim are saying that it's like Mukhruch, that if it's there, it must be that each one of the three have to be a definition of who he is. Is that their thought process?
I think their thought process is they're struggling with the problem that a human being seems to be an animal plus, and an animal seems to be a plant plus. So how do we understand that? So the answer is it's takazai. It's takazai. There's plantness within every animal, and then there's animalness super added on plantness, and the human being has humanness super added on his animalness.
So it's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde with another head.
Something like that. Okay. All right. So that's the Maisovia. Now, okay, I want to comment on one very strange thing the Rambam says, and then we'll go to the end of the parak, and we'll see how human beings become very interesting because of this. So far we learned that the human being is one identity. We didn't quite identify what is the identity of a human being, right? We didn't say what that is. In other words, what does it mean to be human? We'll get to that soon. But remember, the Rambam said like this. The Rambam said that even though we feel and animals feel, that's a different koyach. koyach hamazin asher la'adam, and nenu koyach hamazin asher la'chamor v'lasus. Ki adam nizim b'chelik azam el nefesh ha'anushis. V'chamor nizim b'chelik azam el nefesh ha'chamoris. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? He says when a human being and a living thing has a hargasha, I feel something, it's hard. I feel something's hot. I feel something is soft. So does a horse. Feel it. Ram says, no, that's incorrect. We don't both feel it. I feel it and the horse feels it, but that we're using the word feel and it's doing double duty. It means two different things. It means two different things. Not that the hargasha that Reuven has is the same hargasha that the horse has. That's incorrect. Now, it sounds like the Rambam, it doesn't sound like, but beginners might think the Rambam is saying that the subjective experience of human touch is different than the subjective experience of horse touch. That's not what he's saying. He's not talking about the phenomena, or the subjective experience of touch. He's talking about the lumdus. He's talking about like this. He's saying, and this will help you understand the whole concept of tsura in the Rambam. That's why I said I think the concept will be clearer as we go along. The concept of tsura is like this. Okay, there's something called a human being. There's an idea called a human being. And that idea, whether it exists prior to human beings or only comes into existence with human beings, we can debate that. But there's an idea called human beings, right? That idea is actualized, materialized, or instantiated by every individual human being. Now, what does individual human being have to have? What faculties does he have to have in order for him to be a valid materialization of this idea called human being? The answer is he has to touch, he has to eat, he has to this, he has to that, he has to think. But you know why a human being touches? Is because the nefesh anushis, as part of being a nefesh anushis, you have to have touch. Similarly, as part of being a sus, you have to have touch. But if you want to understand the world properly, and this is why I was very concerned with words, because if language would be perfect, then each separate thing that exists would have its own word. But language is not perfect. Sometimes we use the same word for two different things because they subjectively are the same. And these two things are indeed subjectively the same, because the horse, when he touches something hot, he pulls away his hoof. Same way a human being will hurt his hand. It's not that it's a fundamentally different experience. The Rambam says explicitly in the Meirah that animals suffer through their imagination in the same way that humans do. And the Rambam says explicitly in the Meirah that we should be ashamed of our sense of touch because we have it mitzad our animalistic self. Hopefully we'll see if we have time to get to those things to understand better what a human being is in the Rambam. But the reason why we have that sense of touch is because being a human is mechayev touch. Being a horse is mechayev touch. Being an eagle is mechayev touch. So there's kama v'kama dinim, we could say, because you're lumdim, so you'll understand it that way, of touch in the Welt. There's a din adam, that's mechayev touch. There's a din sus, there's a din eagle. And because there's a concept of the sus, because there's a concept of the adam, that's why there's humans have all the things they need, all the koiches they need to actually be a material human, which is the materialization of this concept called human. Clear?
If that would be the only thing he's saying, the Rambam, then he's not really saying much. Meaning, you have a table and you have a gate with two different suras and gansim. A dent in a table and a dent in a gate, you're not going to say that's not sheet of Hashem. That's a zel bezach. If feeling is the same, it's just that it happens to be a chelik of a different surah, then it's not sheet of Hashem. It means the same exact thing, and then apply it to whichever surah it's a part of.
No, the answer is it feels exactly the same, but it's not exactly the same, because one of them is there in the service of humanness, and one of them is the service of horseness. So when the horse touches, what's happening is horseness is being active. Tsuras have this ability to act. That's you have to think of the world that way. We have to forget all science as it's taught today. You have to think of it that way. There's tsuris, there's these ideas, and they're starting the malachim, right? And then they come down to this world and they start acting. And the tsuris asus becomes active. And because the tsuris asus becomes active, therefore it does this, this, and this. Because it's required for horseness. It's also required for humanness to do something which subjectively is the same as horseness. But it's actually humanness being active in the world. And the horse, when he touches, it's horseness being active. Think of it as an action, as what's being active, as a verb, not as an experience. Think of it as an action, and one is horseness going around and doing its thing, and one is humanness.
Last question, sorry, but shouldn't that further that it is taka a different experience as well? Because the pain that we experience, let's say, is for that the thing that we experience is for our tzura, it's for our avodah. Right? It creates us to get closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom, to daven out, to reach out, everything that it creates us to do. Whereas for a horse, its behemoths doesn't require any of that. So the experience should also be different.
Yeah. So, okay, that's a very important question, which let's leave that because I can't deal with that regular achas yet. That's a very important question, guys. Okay, so now that's so far so good. So we learned that a human being is one entity of a human being. We didn't really learn what that is, though. What's its defining feature? But let's go on. Moving on, Rambam's going to tell us at the end of the parak that this whole nefesh that we've been talking about till now, which remember is a tzura of chomer, and the chomer is the material of the body. Now the Rambam does a very funny move, which he says that this whole nefesh, shezois nefesh ha'achas, that we discussed its faculties or its parts, is itself kachomer. So the nefesh, which is the tzura of the material of the body, is itself the matter for a higher tzura. And that higher tzura is seichel. If it doesn't achieve this tzura, then its ability to be mekabel that tzura is levatala. And it's as if it itself, as if the nefesh exists for nothing. So now let's just talk about a little bit what the Rambam is doing over here, which is just a fascinating thing. Remember, there's no such thing as a chomer without a tzura, right? But here the Rambam is saying there's sort of, in the human being, there's sort of kachomer. There's something which is like chomer without tzura. Because the humanness can be kind of seichel. And the seichel becomes its tzura, if it's kainet. Let's go back to, you said that where the Rambam says the same thing. This is in Perek Dal Halacha Ches, and here the Rambam, this is the second half of the Rambam that I was telling you not to look at before. The Rambam starts off by saying, Nefesh kol basar hi tzura shenas lehakel. All flesh, all living things have a nefesh, and that's the tzura of each living thing. Adam, the sus, and so on. Now you have to read this next part of the Rambam, you have to read it very carefully. By adas hayesera, hamitzuya ben nafshe shel Adam, hi tzuras ha'adam hashalim b'daitoi. So every basar has a tzura. Adam hashalim b'daitoi has a different tzura. What's the tzura of Adam hashalim b'daitoi? That das yisera is his tzura. It's exactly what the Rambam says over here in the Shemona Perakim, that there's you can be mavchen on two levels. When you want to talk about the human being, you have to first talk about the nefesh ha'adam in a similar way that we talk about the nefesh of kol basar. Dahainu, he has a tzura. Okay, what makes a horse a horse? You understand what makes a horse a horse. Go study horses, and you'll know what makes a horse a horse. What makes a human being a human being? Well, we all know what human beings are. That's what makes a human being. It's fine. It's good. Whether he achieves seichel or not, what makes a human being is basically how we define a human being. How do you define a human being? Probably a rational being. In other words, the ability to think. But whether he actually uses that ability and gets somewhere with it or not, he's still a human being. But when it comes to human beings, there's a next step, which is that if a person is an Adam Hashalom B'daitai, then that becomes his tzura. That becomes his mahus, his identity, right? So a person has two identities. A person has an identity, a preliminary identity, or a potential, an identity of potentiality that everyone is born with. He has the potential to think, and that is his identity. He has a tzura, he has a fartik tzura. But that tzura is very interesting because that tzura, the tzura of a human being, which is the potential to think, if it's actualized, and he actually is kind of seichel, then that becomes his tzura. We'll talk about why in a minute, but you see how the Rambam in Yesod HaTorah is doing the same thing that he does over here. That this nefesh ha'achas itself is like chomer, and the seichel is like tzura, and therefore it follows that if it doesn't achieve the tzura, it's as if it's a metzias of hevel. You know why it's as if it's a metzias of hevel? Because there really is no such thing as a chomer b'lei tzura. Really, this world is chomer b'tzura. But a human being occupies a very interesting place, which is that he can be an animal, be like another animal, essentially. Have a nefesh kol basar, right? He could have the same tzura as anything else does, meaning not the same tzura. He's a tzuras adam, that kind of animal, Homo sapiens, tzurasus, fine. But he could also upgrade and be kind of a new tzura, which is a seichel. And because of that, and this is what we call bechira. Now, the whole what's interesting about human beings is that they could actually change themselves. They could become divine. They could become greater than just being an animal. They could or cannot, unlike everything else. In other words, a lion is a lion is a lion. He's not changing. He can't turn into something else. A human being could turn into something else. He could change his tzura, and therefore, since he could change his tzura, we understand that that's a higher tzura, and if he doesn't reach it, it's as if he's light type. It's as if it's hevel. That's the ki'ilu hi mitzias hevel, because on the other hand, a human being could be like another animal. What's wrong with a human being just another animal? Well, because a human being has this potential to reach a higher tzura, which depends on him being kind of seichel. So if he doesn't reach that, it's hevel.
So he's hevel. I mean, he's hevel kalape what he could become, but lemaisa he's just as much of his tzura the way an animal's a tzura.
Yeah, but the weird thing is like this. The weird thing is that in a certain sense, that Rambam is saying that in a certain sense, the whole nefesh that we discussed till now as a tzura is really not a full tzura. It's really more like a chaymer. And the reason why is because, and that's why it's not quite true, that it's okay to just be an animal. Because since the human being has this ability to take this tzura, that's what a human being is. A human being is something that a horse is a horse, meaning a horse is a horse, means what? He has ability to actualize horseness. And when he actualizes horseness, all he's doing is being faithful to what he is. The human being who's faithful to what he is becomes something else. We'll talk about that soon. How do you become something else? But he becomes something else. So therefore, it's a very weird position, you see? Because if you stay your whole life as someone who has the ability, you see like this. What's the essence of a human being? A thing that has the ability to become something else. So as long as I live my whole life with the ability to become something else, I'm not levatala because I lived up to what it means to human being. There's something very corrupt about that, right? Because the whole chefts of human being is something which, if it actually lives up to being a human being, the hainu is kind of seichel, then it'll become something else. So it's not so bush. Okay, but from here we have the idea, which I'll show you in various places in the Rambam, that some people are animals and some people are not animals. But you have to remember when we say when some people are animals, we don't mean the nefesh bahami. There's no such thing as nefesh bahami. There's nefesh adam. But what is an adam? Is an adam another animal? You know, there's a horse, there's a cat, and maybe there's a human being also. Dilma, the human being can be something fundamentally different, because if the seichel is the tzura, right? The seichel is the tzura. That makes him fundamentally different, qualitatively different than animals, right? You understand what I'm saying? Kula, there's no question about it that a human being is not a horse, but that's just like a horse is not a cat. Maybe a human being is another kind of animal, and that's true. On the first nefesh that we discussed till now, you could say one general sentence: nefesh kol basar hitzu rasnos kel, and that's true about kol basar, animals, cats, horses, and eagles, etc. But if you're an adam shalom b'daitoi, then you upgraded to have a different, fundamentally different kind of tzura, and your tzura becomes your knowledge. We'll explain that soon, what that means. Your identity becomes your knowledge. You see, al tzura zu, not the first level tzura that everyone's born with, the ability to be masculine. You have to become a shalom b'das till we can say about you that you are b'tselem Elokim. And Ram says explicitly in the Meir, we'll see that soon, that not everyone is b'tselem Elokim. But let's read this halacha. Kaleimar, shatir le'tzura, a man could achieve a tzura, hayodas umaseges hades, you can achieve a mahos, and your mahos is that you know things, she'en lahem goyim, that you know immaterial things, k'may malachim, she'em tzura b'lei goyim. You become knowledgeable about the fact that there are things that are immaterial, something which Rambam holds that animals do not know. Animals don't know the secret that there's really things that are immaterial. But man can achieve that knowledge, ad sheyidma lahen. And then by achieving that knowledge, you yourself become immaterial. Okay? And this tzura is very, very important, as Rambam says in Halacha Tes, because this tzura, ein tzura hanefesh hazois mechuberes min hayisodos. This tzura, the intellect, this is not connected to matter, and this is why it lasts forever. Okay, now we discussed before, all tzuras come from the malach, even the tzura of a horse. So you have to understand exactly what's the difference between that and the tzura of seichel that you achieve. The Rambam says is not connected from the tzuras and therefore lasts forever. We're not going to go into that now. Okay, so I want to show you some place in the Meira. Let's figure out what we have to understand. What we saw so far is that a human being has two identities, right? He has his first identity, which is akin to the identity of every other animal. And what exactly is that identity? The Ram never told us in this parak, but it's basically, you don't have to describe it because we can figure it out ourselves. You know, whatever makes a human being, what makes him unique, different than the other animals. Same way, again, just to repeat myself. What makes a lion is however a lion is different than the zebra. What makes a zebra is what he's different than a giraffe, and so on and so forth. So too, what makes a human is whatever about a human is different than everything else. But the human being has this very weird thing, which is that when he actually starts acting like a human, he becomes something else. He achieves a different tzura. So what we have to understand is a little bit of how is it that the human being becomes something else, right? Why do you become something else? A horse doesn't become something else when he has a great career of being a horse, but a human being becomes his knowledge, and therefore becomes something.
I'm assuming he's dropping his first tzura, not like the Reifma would say that he has different tzuras going on at once.
Yes, because right, that's very interesting, right? Because his first tzura itself was a hachana. Exactly, because that's Rambam's point, is that the first tzura itself is like a chomer. He's not just saying there happens to be a second tzura, right? He says this whole tzura that we described till now is really not a fartig tzura. It's actually like a chomer, and every chomer, as we know, really needs a tzura, right? It's waiting for a tzura. Yeah, okay. So let's see. Okay, so now we have two in Parak Aleph of Shemona Perakim, just as we have in Mishnah Torah, we really have two definitions of what an Adam is. Either an Adam is he who has the ability to be masculine, we can say, just because that's more or less how we would define a human being, and the Rambam himself defines him that way in other places, in Milas HaGoyin and the Meir, that the definition of a human being, as opposed to the definition of a human being, is that which has the ability to be masculine. And then that's true, that's a human. But then when the human is masculine, he becomes fundamentally a different thing, and he becomes eternal. So now I want to show you just a couple places in the Meir Nevuchim, and then I'll talk about why does the human being actually become a different thing. This is in Chelik Alf Perak Zayin of the Meira. What do you see on your screen? You could see it? Okay, now it's good. Fine. The Rambam is explaining, okay, so the Rambam starts Perak Aleph, Chelik Aleph, Perak Aleph in the Meir Nevuchim, is coming to explain what does it mean that man is B'Tselem Elokim. If Hashem doesn't have a shape, so what does it mean that man is B'Tselem Elokim? And the answer is Tselem doesn't mean shape, Tselem means Tzura. This is the answer the Rambam gives in Chelik Aleph, Perak Aleph. Tselem means Tzura, and Tzura means that which makes the thing what it is, as we've been discussing till now. And how is it that man is B'Tselem Elokim then? We'll leave that question, but that somehow answers the question. So the Rambam takes that further now in Chelik Alf Perek Zayin, and he's addressing here the pasuk on the top of the page that's up on the screen. The pasuk says that after 130 years of Adam's life, he had a child b'demusai kitzalmoi. Now, if tzalmoi means what makes a human being, not his shape, that would mean that after 130 years, Adam Rishon had a son whose identity was the same as Adam's, right? And that's what Rambam says. I already explained to you what Tzelem means. The children that preceded Sheis did not have the true Tzura HaEnushis, which is the Tzelem HaAdam L'Dumusai and also Tzelem Elokim. Only Sheis, because Adam taught him V'havinuhu, and he brought him to Havana, V'nimtza Shalom Ashlemus HaEnushi, Amar Baviyal B'Dumusai Ketzalmai. So there's a Tzura HaEnushis and there's a Tzura HaEnushis Be'emes. And this is what we've been learning about in the Shemona Perakim and the Yesod Torah. The Tzura HaEnushis is every human being has the ability to be masculine. But if you're actually masculine, you're actually a loimen and maven, then you become a true human being. So this second level Tzura, second level identity, is the real identity. And what does it mean it's the real identity? As Rambam says in the Shemona Perakim, it means if you didn't make it to that, you're not living up to what you are. Why? Because a human being, what is a human being? Is potential. Okay? Again, I have to explain to you why that's the case. Why is Seichel different than everything else? Remember, the Rambam doesn't say if your horse doesn't act horsefully, he's not a horse. He doesn't say that. Talk about human. And here he says specifically, as we said before, so is a human being an animal or is a human being fundamentally different? It depends. A human being by birth is an animal who has the shape of a human being. This word al-tsuras ish is unfortunate. It's an unfortunate translation. It should really be shape, because tsura means form. That's the whole round point. But anyways, the point is he's really an animal, but he has the shape of a human being. Only if you achieved the tsura are you actually a human being. This is Chelik Alf Perek Aleph. Tselem. The word tselem refers to the natural form. Ratzaleimar, that thing that makes the thing what it is. V'haya mashahu, its whatness or its mahos. V'hu hamitosai, that is its true essence. Me'asher hu hanimtza hahu, that is what makes it what it is. Asher ha'inyan hu ba'adam hu. So what is it about an adam that makes an adam? It's that thing asher ba'avuroi tiyeh hasaga hanushis. That thing which gives a person the possibility to be masig is what makes him a human being. So what makes a human is that he has the ability to be masig. So again, the ability to be masig is what makes a person an adam. And once he is actually masig, because he can actually be masig, therefore he's called Tzelem Elokim. So it means a human being has the ability to be masig, but that really just makes him like an animal. A horse has the ability to be a horse, and a human being has the ability to think, and it's all very nice. Everyone does what they're used to, and that's great. But that doesn't make him B'Tselem Elikim. What makes him B'Tselem Elikim is if he's actually masig. So I'll tell you like this. Maybe we should wrap things up. Yeah, it's getting long, but let me tell you what the vart is. Bekitzer, why is it that when a person is masig, he becomes something else? The Rambam has this idea. This is in Chilik Aleph Perak Samach Ches. It's a very, very important idea in the Rambam. Remember, the Rambam said in the end of Shemona Perakim Perak Aleph, he said, "Oh, but to talk about Seichel and Chomer Tzur, that's very complicated. We'll leave that for someplace else." Here in this Perak, the Rambam also talks about in Chilik Aleph Perak Samach Ches. He also talks about the nature of Seichel, and he also warns about how difficult it is to understand these things. The Rambam considers the concept of intellect to be very difficult to understand. But the Rambam says, we can't go through it now. I'll tell you Bekitzer. What he says is as follows. He says, once a person is maskil something, once a person has an idea in his head, such as, let's say, the idea of a tree, then the person becomes that idea. Here, I'm on that page 100 here. Sheyaskil davar echad. When a person is maskil something, for example, in the parentheses, a tree, what does it mean a person to be maskil a tree? It doesn't mean he sees the tree. It means he has the concept of the treeness in his mind. Azu maskil b'payil. So then the person becomes an actual maskil, right? In other words, he doesn't have the potential to understand treeness. He actually knows treeness. Then the seichel that's in his mind is the tzura seilon. The person who was able to perceive the concept of the tree, asher hu hamaskil, hu haseichel. Now he became seichel. Okay, it's a very abstruse idea. I'll tell you bekitzer, and maybe we'll see if we have to continue this next time to understand this. The point is like this. I have the ability to know treeness, right? But once I actualize that ability, what that ability turned into the concept of treeness. The treeness, which is an idea, is now me. Before I had the idea of treeness, let's say all I had this potential for an idea. But once that my brain, whatever, don't think about the material brain, once my thought, instead of just having the potential to know treeness, once I actually have that thought of treeness, then that thought, that idea is my identity, is me. Before I had the idea, I was only the potential for the idea. But once I turned into the idea, then once I took the potentiality and made it into an idea, that idea is now my essence. So basically, in a short way, we could say it, without maybe to keep it simple. Since a person's essence is different than a horse's essence, a person's essence is the ability to have ideas. And ideas are such that once you have the idea, that is you. It's not just something you did. It's your thinking ability turned into thought. So Mamela, your tzura becomes an upgrade. Okay? But to say it in a very simple, very, very simple way, and we have to think about these things more, but now I'll say it very simple and then I'll end. What's a person? What's a human being, right? So I say, what are you? I meet you, I say, what are I? How do I relate to you? Well, you are all the things you can think, and that you have the potential to think lots of things. But once you know all those things, once you actually know all those things, then you are all the things you know. Then you are all the things you know. Your body is obviously not so interesting. Why is your body not so interesting? Because a person is one nefesh, and that nefesh itself is all the ability to think. That's really what the nefesh is. You know why you touch, you know why you feel, you know why you eat, because that's all serving the ability to think. Once you actualize the ability to think, now you become a bunch of ideas. And those ideas then are what you really are. So the human being has this unique space, he occupies this unique place where he, by actualizing or by living up to his tzura, he becomes a different thing. Okay, I'll leave it at that. And I hope it wasn't too rushed on the Hezbollah over here. See if we have to get to it. I think we'll probably have to get back to you next time. Okay. Any questions? Any thoughts?
These 2 questions. First of all, he's saying that so with every piece of information that you know, you're developing a new surah, or no? That surah, that will be similar to just a change in the same surah, meaning a tables its whatness is a table, whether it's a granite table or a marble table. It's not getting a different surah in each time. So is a person a different person if he gets a new knowledge, or he's the same same surah, just got upgraded?
I mean, so the way it says the Yesod Torah, the extra das, that is the person's surah. So I think your surah is the totality of everything you know. That's your surah, and the more you know, the more you have a different surah. Absolutely.
You keep every time you learn something, you're becoming a new person.
Yeah, I think so. Why is it a
That
problem?
means that the tour is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Going up and down,
Right. Yeah. If you forget things, then you're also a different surah, right? Not every piece of information qualifies, because not every piece of information is a surah she'ein lo goylem. Just because you know information doesn't change your surah. Okay, we're talking about knowing abstractions.
And is this concept that when you use your whole nefesh for its correct, but in its whole correctly, you become a new surah with the seichel, with das? Is this what the Kuzari means when he says that above Adam there's the Yehudi?
There's a certain parallel idea. I mean, there's certain parallelness between the Rambam and the Kuzari in this. Because the Kuzari starts with Adam, who was B'Tselem Elokim, and then how that's preserved. It's a very interesting question. The thing is that the Yehuda Levi has human beings being higher than animals. Oh, that's very interesting. I hear what you're saying. No, the Yehuda Levi has inanimate things, right? Daimim tzemeach chai medaber adam. And now we learn today in the Rambam that there's animals, Adam, and perfected Adam. But is the first Adam, Rambam says, is just an animal. So when Yehuda Levi has animals and then humans, that might already be the Adam who's perfected. I'm not sure whether Rambam's imperfected Adam is Bechlal a different class, right? He says he's an animal in the shape of a human. He's that's a gorilla. So
yeah, but the Rambam himself first says that even the margish of the nefesh is different than the nefesh of a behemoth before he even gets to das.
Yes. Yeah, but that's because the margish of a horse is different than the margish of a eagle, not because it's a human. Because it's so nefesh. Not because a human being is better than a horse, just because a human being is different than a horse.
I mean, he'll say that the margish of a horse is a borrowed term. What's his lashon again?
Shutuf borrowed.
He'll say it's lashon meshutaf to the margish of a lion.
Yes. Loisha Agosha Shabuvini Agosha Shabazeh. So Valeha Agosha Shabazeh Min, Agosha Beina Shabazeh Min Ha'acher. The Kol Min V'Min Ashayesh Nefesh Yesh Nefesh Achzul Nefesh Acher. See? Because that's because of what I explained before, that there's Kama Dinim in the Welt. There's a Din Sus, there's a Din Aryeh, there's a Din Egel, Velkos, all these Dinim. And each Din, so to speak, has to have its Pa'ulas to support the Din. Yeah, that's nothing to do with the fact that a human is better. So it's an interesting question you're asking. I think I once had the same idea that Yehuda Levi really means that. I mean, Yehuda Levi has his genetic aspect too, that somehow it's preserved in genetically, even if it gets lost for some generations. So that seems to be magical. And I mean to say is like this. I mean, that's not merely what the Rambam is saying. There might be some magic that There's some human beings that are inherently predisposed to perhaps doing what the Rambam is saying. Yes. That Rabbi Yehuda Levi doesn't tell us. He doesn't seem to mean the Rambam. Short answer is no shaykhs. That's a short answer. But whatever. We have to learn the Rabbi Yehuda Levi separately. It's a whole different limud. It's right to also compare them, put them together, but his Iker Binyan is very different. All right, so we'll leave it at that.
Are we ending the recording?
Yeah, let me end the recording, and then we could really say everything you want to say.